Shows would be constantly doing Halloween or like holiday episodes, right?
Right.
So when Halloween was coming near, you'd have your sitcom that would do their Halloween episode or their Thanksgiving episode or their Christmas episode.
You'd mentioned how there'd be the replicator.
What's that?
You'd mentioned how there'd be turkeys in the replicator.
Right. Yes, exactly. So that is always a staple of my childhood. So not so surprisingly, here we are with the Star Trek doing a Halloween episode. Like you never thought you would hear the two twains meet, Halloween and Star Trek. And yet here we are, witches and ghosts and black cats, skeletons, dungeons, castles, woo, all that and more. And we're going to get to it. But first, let me do introductions as always. My name is Matteo, coming to you from Austin, and my little corner of my living room, and coming to us from Planet Houston, because I haven't called it that in a while. My brother and yours, Ken. Say hello, Ken.
Hailing frequencies are open.
Woo! So here we are. We're going to have a lot of fun this episode, because I'm already starting to get a little bit loopy, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great. So let's do this. It was a long, weird day at work. First, we're going to talk a little bit about Robert Bloch here, the guy who wrote this episode. As you mentioned at the end of the last episode, he was the guy who wrote the book that became Psycho. Also, he was part of the committee, wasn't that what it was called, that Harlan Ellison put together to get the letter writing campaign going of famous sci-fi writers, speculative fiction writers. So he had written a script for Star Trek called Sleeping Beauty, but they felt that it was so similar to Space Seed that they kind of passed on it. But what they decided to have him do instead was do what he was best at, which is like the macabre, right? Scary stuff. And as we might see in Psycho, right, we get some pretty crazy things happening. Is that he wanted to do something that would involve like changes in appearances, but he didn't want to do Jekyll and Hyde because he thought that was too overdone. So he thought a female having like a chameleon-like adaptation, it would be really great. So the rest of that then just falls into place. If you remember when we talked about Little Girls, he had already written a short story that was became the basis for what the script had become. So he did the same thing here. His little story, Broomstick Ride, was an Earth ship that arrives on a planet Prius, where a captain and his crew members encountered witches and warlocks. The witches can read minds. And because of images that they see in the subconscious mind of the Earthmen, they believe humans can present a danger. So to defend themselves, the leader of the witches conjures up a miniature of the Earth ship and throws it into the hot coals. And this causes the real spaceship to explode. All of those things sound very familiar to things that happen in Catspaw. They sent it to NBC, and as always, Stan Robertson had a couple of things to say about it. He said, I like it, but just get rid of all the magic elements. Robinson, he insisted that they resolve the story in a manner which would not leave the viewer with the feeling, implied or otherwise, that the basis for what had transpired during the drama was magical, mystical, or in any form the occult. So the idea that it becomes, oh, well, there's a scientific reason behind it,
right?
Basically came from Robertson's edict from NBC.
So if we remember that Star Trek is an Enlightenment document, that's part of the Enlightenment. One of the things about the Enlightenment was escaping supernatural explanations for things like earthquakes in Lisbon or any kind of There are scientific reasons, that there are material reasons, naturalistic reasons. And so we need to replace supernaturalism with naturalism as an explanation for why things happen.
There was a scene in the original script where when Jackson comes up and he falls down, that his body starts to like decompose in front of them. They decided not to take it that far. Not only that, but NBC also put the kibosh on it as well. But
because it's what, ooky?
Right, yeah, because it's too gross for 1960s television. Even funnier about that was Robert Justman was like, well, unless we want to win the throw-up award for 1967, let's not put that in. Which I thought was really funny. I'm like, what? Also, in an early draft of the episode, it wasn't Jackson who died. It was Sulu. They were going to kill Sulu in this episode. Well, not they, but Block was going to kill him. And, of course, Justman was like, I don't know if we should kill Sulu. And not only that, but like now there are like 2 other team members who have beamed down to the planet whose names we're just hearing about for the first time. Should these be the guys that like Kirk is fighting to save? Like that just doesn't make any sense. So obviously the swap was made to make it Scotty and Sulu and have some no-name die.
So sometimes people are like, why are the navigator and the engineer doing a planet survey?
Right.
And if you think that your career is limited to being the navigator forever and being the engineer forever, that might make sense, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And of course, the fact that we go on to 5 Star Trek movies in which Sulu is basically the navigator on the Enterprise and Scotty's the engineer, and only gets his own ship in the 6th movie in which Scotty's still running around the Enterprise as the engineer. It's easy to fall into that way of thinking, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's another character in this episode, DeSalle. We've seen him 3 times now. We saw him first in Squire of Gothos, in which he was some kind of science officer. We saw him in another episode in which he was, he was originally a navigator. Then he becomes a science officer who's still in gold. Now he's an engineer who's in red. Right? So
he is the assistant chief engineer.
That's right. And there's an idea. So the idea at the time was we're going to make him more of a regular character, which never panned out. Because again, when you're passing out writing to like a bunch of people who don't really work on the show, whoever has the idea, hey, let's make DeSalle more of a regular character, that never gets into any of the scripts. And unless somebody's like, no, I gotta plug DeSalle in everywhere, he's not gonna get included, so that he gets forgotten. But that idea, like that you are trying to get skills, you're trying to put things on your resume, you're trying to like solve problems so that you can move up and out of wherever you are. You want to make captain someday, you need to be out there doing planetary surveys. You can't be sitting behind your navigators thing and or your engineering. You need to get out there and do stuff. So it makes sense that these 2 guys are out doing this. The other thing is that these kinds of jobs often they're on rotation, right? We do see the rotation one time in court martial, and which you go, okay, planetary survey. Who's up next? Scotty and Sulu. Okay, you guys, this is your survey. Take Mr. No Name Guy with you. So this is season 2. This is the season of red shirts, right? In the first season and the 3rd season, the distribution of deaths is much more equal across the colors. Here in season 2, in an effort to make space look more dangerous, there are a lot of people who die, mostly security officers, and they're going to be wearing a lot of red, right? This is where the idea of the red shirt comes from, season 2. But the very first no-name guy who dies is wearing gold.
Dun, dun, dun.
Gotta keep a running tally.
Love it. One of the other big complaints that not only Stan Robertson, but even DC Fontana wrote about this episode was that there's just a lack of action. Mm-hmm. They felt that the mystery might hold it all together, but that they needed to add, again, especially from the original draft, but even once we get to the final draft, that there's just not enough like action action, as they call it in this episode.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of. It's difficult to think about, right? So what's wrong with this episode? Because there's something missing. I think that's hard to deny.
Right.
Right. So,
absolutely.
Is it that they did not explore some of this stuff well enough? That some of these conflicts weren't well thought out enough? So we could have seen more of the conflict between Sylvia and Colob, right? Maybe there would have been more drama and tension. On the other hand, I feel when I read some of these complaints, why would we, following the Enterprise crew, get to a satisfactory resolution of what was going on this planet? They kind of stumble into something, and then they extricate themselves by accident, really.
Mm-hmm.
Why should they end up with closure about, we understand what happened here? It makes perfect narrative sense. I mean, you understand where, like, as TV, that might make sense. But maybe that's not the problem. Maybe the problem is in some other execution of the story.
That'll be an interesting thing to think about as we're going through this episode. Maybe we can sort of like pinpoint, like, it kind of falls apart here,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A couple of other things that they changed. They felt like there wasn't enough because, at the end of this, of course, Colob, turns against Sylvia and helps Kirk escape. So, Colob, and there wasn't enough building towards that in the original draft of this episode. So they added that scene, where they talk about the old ones, which is funny because that's also from Little Girls too, if you remember.
Block is a Lovecraftian.
Okay.
He's a thoroughgoing Lovecraft guy, and so references to the old ones crop up in his work as though he's writing in the Lovecraftian universe. I hope
that's not what he's talking about. Well, I think if he was talking about those old ones, that we'd have a much bigger problem on our hands than these two people who can't get along. Maybe so now that you bring it up, that's actually probably one of the problems with this story is that I don't feel like there's any like real threat in this episode.
Right.
Like we don't know where they come from, so we don't know why they're here. Are they just exploring? And because Colob at one point even says like, "Hey, we could have come in peace."
Right.
So wait, were you coming in peace, or were you coming to like take over the galaxy? We don't know what their plan was. What were they doing here?
In that whole middle act, in which they do kind of develop that, it seems like our science is so foreign to their science. Their science looks a lot like magic or telepathy, or it's all mentalism for a sufficiently advanced species. And they want to learn like how communicators work and phasers work and energy things and warp drive, and they're interested in that kind of science that they don't know anything about because they're using transmuters and getting around.
And they're able to, adjust matter with their mind.
Yeah.
But again, it never really clicks on what they're doing here, other than maybe exploring.
Right.
And Sylvia I don't know. And even if that is it, even if now we have talked it out and we've realized that what it was is like these two were just here exploring this new galaxy, this new way of thinking, this new way of being, and Sylvia decides like, hey, I love the idea of sensations and feelings and all of this stuff, and so she gets sidetracked. I don't feel like that's communicated enough. I don't know.
So there's this. So we start off in kind of this spooky, they're getting into the subconscious of humans and our fears, and then all of a sudden, how does your communicator work? It's fascinating, and then you get to this like, we have to stop her, and then there's like the thing at the end.
Yeah.
In which we have to stop Sylvia from what exactly? Figuring out how communicators work?
Exactly. What are we stopping her from? Yeah, I guess I guess again she wants to take over the galaxy or do whatever it is she wants to do. Billions of worlds of all different kinds of sensations or whatever it is she says. But you're like, and then is that bad? Is she like,
for example, had they kept going with the spooky malevolence of, the witchy, ghosty, then, she could have decided that the way she was going to get her technical knowledge that we realize she wants in Act 2, by spooky, horrible means, we're going to take over all of your crew. I'm going to subject you to spookiness and shackle you to walls and turn you into my little pets.
Yeah.
Turn Sulu into a newt. Then you'd be like, wait a minute, she's going to screw it. And then you get like other people to beam down and get, whoa, and hypnotized. And you're like, oh, she's going to get the whole crew. We're trapped here. Colob put a case around us. She's bringing people down, turning Sulu into a newt, threatening us with more witchcraft, craziness in an attempt to threaten us into giving us technical secrets, explaining our science. That would be more frightening, but they really abandoned the spooky stuff after the first act.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what was the point of it anyway? Like, they got it wrong. I was thinking of like the emeralds and gems, how they're like, hey, we got this wrong. We think that this is, and so, this is supposed to scare you because this is what, for some reason, inherently in humans, it's scary for skeletons and castles and black cats to be around.
So it's interesting that in the same way, our crew might beam down, stumble into this thing and get out of it without really knowing what were they here for. I guess we'll never know because they turned into little kind of puppy things at the end and died. That they, the villains, didn't understand our crew. That they're like, oh, wait a minute, we thought you were... So this is the same mistake. I'm now going to draw the big analogy.
Do it.
This is like so many other... super being episodes, right? Like Squire of Gothos, which I think is the most similar to this episode.
Yeah, I reference it a lot.
In which, Trelane, because of course we got DeSalle, right? DeSalle was one of the first guys to beam down to figure out the Trelane business. Trelane could see the Earth, but it was hundreds of years ago. So he saw it in the 18th century. He didn't understand that fire was hot or that food had taste.
Yep.
He apparently could hear things because he could play the music, and he could see things because he had some of the, look correct, right?
The aesthetics. Yeah.
Right. But clearly he had a misunderstanding of what was going on. He didn't realize that humans were this advanced. He got things wrong like taste and heat. All the sensations. Notice the sensations come up again, right?
Yeah.
Things that you feel. He didn't understand any of that. And so here we have another group of super beings who, one, don't understand humans the way they think they do because they're looking at it through the wrong something, right? Not necessarily a time shift in this case, but they got too deep into the subconscious. And then they also don't understand sensations. Now, in this case, they're obsessed with sensations as opposed to in that one where it's just like, the fire's not hot. The food doesn't taste. There's something wrong here. He doesn't have as much power as we think he does.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it's a weakness that Kirk tries to exploit at the end of Act 2. So we get a lot of similarities.
Yes. So there were a couple things that DC Fontana, when she did her rewrite on this episode, she sort of scaled down. Most of it involved the giant cat at the end, which of course is totally ridiculous. Colob was supposed to die by a giant paw through his chest. Obviously, virtually impossible to simulate, especially in the 60s. So she just made it the door fall on him because that made much more sense.
It was easier to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, it was also her idea to put the little Enterprise into the block, preventing any further rescue attempts. So that was off the table. So the audience wasn't wondering why they were sending people down. That's also smart. So we got Joseph Peabney here, who's hired to direct. He and Mark Daniels would pretty much alternate as the Star Trek resident directors. You remember Peavney and Mark Daniels, they did, so many of first season episodes. So it's kind of exciting to have those guys back. There are going to be a few exceptions along the road, times when those guys needed a break or time off or whatever. But for the most part, they were the two people who handled the directing. I love this. He has this to say about he feels like he was one of the people who brought on the idea of Chekhov being Russian. He said so, and he had worked with Walter Koenig before on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So he also was one of the people who suggested that Walter Koenig come in. So I brought him in, and he had a new career, you know, and he looks great. He's got this great face, and he's got some kind of interesting accent. Sure ain't Russian. In any event, who cares? That's what he said. I thought it was amazing. In any event, who cares? Not to bring the room down a little bit, but Theodore Marcuse, who plays Colob in this episode, died a week after this aired in a motorcycle accident. How crazy is that?
It's those motorcycles, I tell you.
I know, man. Taking care of everybody in the 60s. So as you mentioned, DeSalle comes back in this one. Of course, he was in the Squire of Gothos, as you were just recalling. He was also in This Side of Paradise. Also, John Winston comes back for his fourth appearance as Lieutenant Kyle, the transporter chief.
Yep. Kyle becomes a kind of regular as well.
Right, exactly.
I mean, he's often just standing there. He maybe gets a line or two, but we see him, you know, he's like Lieutenant Leslie, who was played by Shatner's stand-in.
Yeah.
And so who's always available on set for, you know, wandering through a hallway, handing someone a document.
Exactly.
Kyle never quite disappears.
To build the set of the castle, not like any of the rooms or anything, just the actual like castle set, was $9,375. But the work was done on a Saturday and a Sunday, so time and a half was required. So the final cost ended up being $13,000 to build this. And this doesn't include set dressing, just building of the interior and the exterior of the castle.
I almost wish they could have, like, basically used the Munsters set or something.
Yeah, you know? Seriously.
You know, it looks spooky or whatever. We're kind of like, wait a minute. In the same way that you'd look and go, isn't that Mayberry?
Right.
You'd go, isn't that where its box would normally be? Behind that curtain, couldn't we pull a thing and like, you rang?
Oh wait, that's that cave guy from that one episode with the robots.
Right. Yes, he shows up, but he shows up in his robot costume. You rang.
This is ridiculous. So day one of production was also Walter Koenig's first day on the set. They did all of that stuff on the bridge, including all the scenes where Kirk is on the ground and DeSalle's running things on the bridge. This day was also marked with the first mention in Star Trek of the word credit being used. When DeSalle says, maybe we can't break it, but I'll bet you credits to Navy beans that we can put a dent in it.
Navy beans.
I know, they mentioned Navy beans. That was my next point. I'm like, really? Navy beans? What are we talking about? The Starfleet Navy? I don't know what you're talking about, Navy beans. So this is a little bit here about choosing DeSalle here. Kuhn decided that there was a need for someone to be running engineering on occasions whenever Scott was running the ship. So he thought, well, there might be times when they need to call down to engineering. We got to put somebody there. So let's bring in DeSalle here and we'll just make him in. So he was signed for a recurring role. However, within weeks, as more scripts came in, it was discovered that when Scott was left in command, the scripted action always played between the bridge and whatever was happening with Kirk and Scott on the planet. And no side trips to engineering were ever needed. So did the opposite of what it was supposed to, and Barrier ended up leaving the show.
Yeah.
Poor guy. Another person, we've seen a couple of them who said, yeah, no, you'll be coming back. It'll be great. And then they just don't.
So in the kind of expanded universe, to borrow a term, people really like DeSalle. So there are stories that involve Mirror DeSalle.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Funny.
There are stories about when he becomes captain, and he's a Captain DeSalle. And one of the things that's interesting is that he never had a first name. So the original script gave him one name, and that kind of became his official name, right? But in other places, he had, no name, so people made up various other names. So he ends up with a guy with, depending on what you're reading, he's got like 6 or 7 first names.
Interesting. So also, this is weird, is that when they remastered these episodes from the 60s, they changed the contrast levels. And so some of the episodes, including this one, the original lighting of the episode is dramatically different from when it was originally aired, because they brightened it so that we could see everything, as opposed to like, oh, well, we actually did that for effect, not just because of, crappy lighting in the 60s. So this is one of the big episodes where Finnerman, especially himself, was like, nope, they just ruined everything that I had done on the day because of their remastering. Also, this is interesting. The small metal model of the Enterprise that it was encased in the box of lucite. So, of course, they filmed it one day with it out in the lucite, put it in the lucite overnight, and then finished filming it the next day. Was later donated to the Smithsonian by Matt Jeffries. So that's cool. So that's in the Smithsonian somewhere, theoretically. Let me see what else I got here.
It's right next to the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, exactly. It could be boarded up somewhere. No one would ever know.
It's now absorbed mysterious powers.
Yep. Let's stop there, and we'll go ahead and get right into this episode and have some fun talking about Catspaw.
Captain's log. Stardate.
It's 5-year mission.
Music is different in this episode. We actually got a composer to come in and almost directly do brand new music throughout the whole thing. So our opening here is different from our normal twinkly one that we're so used to. It's not that one. It's another one with crazy horns going.
And it's got like a 60s hip vibe to it.
Still no response, sir.
Just a little bit, absolutely. Spock and Kirk stand behind Uhura. They're like waiting for something. We can't tell what it is. Oh, it's a response from the surface. So they're waiting for Spock and Sulu to call up. They know the procedures. They should have called. But then Spock, I don't know why, suggests that perhaps the away team didn't find anything. That's a weird suggestion coming from Spock, who knows the letter of the law and knows procedures and would follow them.
Yep.
But there you go. Then suddenly Jackson calls up and says, 1 to beam up, sir. Kirk says, 1? Where's the rest of the group? We are all left to wonder. Where's the rest of the group? Jackson repeats, 1 to beam up. Kirk heads down to the transporter room with like no security or anything for this weird situation. I mean, if suddenly there was only like one person to beam up and he's not answering you, wouldn't you be like, I mean, again, we are crafty in the ways of sci-fi and horror, but I mean, wouldn't you, it just sounds suspicious. You'd be like, we better get somebody down there with that phaser. Anyway, so they head down there, McCoy arrives, and then so does Jackson, who stands there for a minute and then falls like really hard to the floor.
What's up with this fall?
I know. He's not even a stuntman, but they were actually specifically looking for somebody who could fall hard. So weird. Anyway, and then McCoy gets to him, and instead of saying, he's dead, Jim, he instead says, the man is dead. Come on, McCoy, you got one line. Let's give us what we're looking for here.
It's life, Jim, but not as we know it.
Well, we get that. We've gotten that like 2 or 3 times from Spock. We're not getting anything. We're not getting any of the cool stuff out of McCoy. Although we did get, I'm a doctor, not an elevator or something out of him. So that's at least good. Then emanating out of the man's body, I get that's what we're supposed to believe, I think, is a voice that warns them of the curse. And if they don't leave, they will die. Opening credits. Now, even our opening credits are different. Now we have the singing version of it, with the and but no awesome lyrics, just the vocalization here. But it's that's actually a whole new rewritten version of the opening credits. Not rewritten, I shouldn't say, but it's a newly orchestrated version of the opening credits. So Kirk, Spock, McCoy decide they're going to beam down to the planet. I was thinking this has got to be some ridiculous breach of Starfleet, right? I mean, first of all, you're not bringing any security down with you. 3 of your guys are missing. No security guys. Okay. No one bringing any of those guys. And then, I mean, I guess DeSalle is a lieutenant commander of some sort. We don't quite know what his rank is, but I mean, you got Sulu and Scott down here as well because they're the missing party. Shouldn't like Spock be on the bridge or somebody minorly important?
Yeah,
I mean, majorly important.
You've got the first, second, and third in command down on the planet.
Right.
You've got Sulu, who's the navigator. You've got McCoy, who's the ship's doctor. It's like you're basically left with the newly promoted, second in engineering, and I suppose the records officer is always there as a lieutenant commander.
That guy we never see or hear from again. Love
He's
it.
probably in some capsule somewhere,
Hiding out.
That's right.
Love it. I mean, obviously, we know that this would never happen in Next Generation, right? Because they got the rules set in Next Generation. So
also,
Picard.
And here's the thing: is they got a bigger regular cast, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the idea that you're gonna, send everybody down is silly. Instead, basically half of your main cast would stay up on the ship and do real things. Whereas what we're really getting here is kind of an introduction to Chekhov. Right?
True.
So there's the moment where he's like, do you need to calibrate your instruments? And he's like, I'm not that green.
Yeah.
So we're getting a bit of an introduction to Chekhov. Otherwise, maybe somebody thinks that DeSalle is going to become a regular character or a recurring character, and him being there is kind of weighty. You've still got Uhura there.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine Next Generation with basically the new guy, the guy that someone thinks is going to be a recurring character who won't, and like a normal member of the bridge. So it's like, I don't know, Worf, some guy who was navigator in an episode when Wesley wasn't there. And Wesley?
Right.
Would that be? That's who's on the bridge?
Yeah. It'd basically be like if they were to do this, it would be, LaForge would be Scott, so he'd be gone. You'd have like Worf, basically.
Yeah, it'd be Worf and Wesley on the bridge with a guy who we're like, we don't know who he is.
Which, to be fair, at least that happens a lot in Next Generation, Somebody goes off to do something and some random person like standing at another station comes in and takes their spot. See that happen a lot, actually. So just so the audience knows, at this point, they tell us that they are here to discover who killed Jackson. And, what else happened to Scott and Sulu. We also now have a mist coming in. It's rolling in. We spent a lot of time talking about how you shouldn't walk into mists in Galileo 7. I don't want to rehash it.
And you do get that great scene where Shatner is like testing the mist with his foot, and
is there like water down here? Should I?
It's like he thought very carefully about how would my character approach this mist. I'd have to test the footing. I'd be concerned about whether it was slippery or wet or solid. I have to establish that on camera.
That's because I'm telling you, there is an entire week that they spend on security protocol that they tell you not to walk into mists.
That's right.
Spock also mentions that the mist is strange here because there are no bodies of water. There's been no change in temperature, so where's this mist coming from? We don't know. Spock then picks up life signs. Kirk calls up to the bridge to try and confirm it. DeSalle turns to Chekhov and says, "What do you got, mister?" And then we see Chekhov, who really does have the most god-awful wig. Man, George Takei was not kidding. That thing looks awful.
And he totally looks like he might just break out into, Daydream Believer at any moment.
Right, exactly, yeah. But then they lose the away team again. It suddenly disappears. We don't know what happens. The trio presses on, and then some witches or ghosts or something appear out of nowhere. There's one high screechy one that I don't even understand, so I decide to close caption it. All three say, Captain Kirk, Captain Kirk, Captain Kirk. And then they each say, go back, go back, go back. And then they say, remember the curse. Wind shall rise, fog descend. So leave here all, or meet your end. And then there's some cackling that goes on. So now I understand why I didn't understand what they were saying. It's because it's impossible to understand even knowing what they are saying. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think
and then
these are the Macbeth witches, right?
Yeah, basically, exactly, yeah. But then, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have these awesome next 5 lines, which are Spock, comment. Very bad poetry, Captain. A more useful comment, Mr. Spock. Well, what we've seen wasn't real. Oh, now that is useful. I love that. That's just great. Then Spock says that, I don't even know what this means, that at Azimuth 24, there are life readings. Then suddenly the wind really starts to blow. And McCoy says, well, that's a pretty good illusion, Mr. Spock. McCoy then spots a mansion, kind of a creepy house around the corner. They sort of banter back and forth about if the mansion is corrupting the sensors or not, but why isn't it affecting the tricorder? Anyway, so they just move inside into the castle, and they are scared by a black cat who hisses at them. Oh boy. Someone really is trying to scare them. All of these Halloween tropes all of a sudden. And then they mention trick or treat. Notice they don't mention Halloween. They mention trick or treat. Back aboard the Enterprise, they have lost all trace of the trio. So it's interesting here because, especially what you're talking about, how much people like DeSalle, I thought he was so boring and flat. Like, you know, like for me, you put DeSalle next to Shatner saying those exact same lines, and you're like, Shatner every day of the week. You know what I mean?
And twice on Sundays.
But yeah, so I don't know. Like, I'm glad DeSalle never comes back because I'm just like, I don't know. I just thought the actor was really flat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway. So back on the planet, the door closes behind them. They go wandering through the passageways, sort of following the cat, I guess. And next thing you know, the floor gives away and they tumble down into a hole in the ground. They wake to find themselves shackled to walls. Oh my goodness. But they are fine. What's that?
Next to a fourth guy who's been there a while.
Skeleton. Yeah, skeleton just hanging there. And these guys are fine too, right? They just did this fall without any warning. No concussions, no broken bones. Convenient. Then they start saying, could this possibly be an Earth parallel development? So that's interesting because we've talked in the past, I think it was What Little Girl's Made Of, actually. It was one of the episodes where there's this idea that exists that there are similar planets to Earth throughout the galaxy.
Right.
And so here it's actually, again, they actually mentioned it in the episode. And so it's funny that that's not something that is, I don't know, I think that that's something that's interesting that it's not played on more. Like, you know, Next Generation never does anything. Yeah. Well, yeah, here they do. Yeah. But I mean, you go back to What Little Girls Are Made Of, and you're like, well, yeah, it's like the development of, you know, the 1930s or 40s or whatever it was supposed to be. So they start talking about how these are all Earth manifestations, right? Ghost stories. Somebody's trying to scare them. Then Scott and Sulu walk in. Scott has a phaser in his hand. Kirk demands that he puts down the phaser.
Well, first they're all happy to see them. They're like, hey, we're being rescued.
Yeah, thank us, the guys, yeah.
And then they go to each one of them going, yeah, rescue, woo. And then they cut back to Sulu and you know, Scott, who are like, we're here to collect the newspapers. And McCoy and Kirk are like, oh.
Oh. But at least they're here to let us out.
They got the brain cloud.
That's right. Scott doesn't listen. He keeps the phaser pointed at them as we go to commercial. Back at it. They try to get through to the two of them, but to no avail. McCoy even says that they look drugged. He says, "Look at their eyes." I thought that was weird, especially since what we do find out is that they are being mind controlled.
Right.
It's like, why bring up the idea of them I know that they're like trying to figure it out or whatever, but it's just weird that they that's not even where it goes. So it's like, why even bring that up?
Yeah, so I think then this may be the question of like realism versus storytelling. Whereas, so this is a familiar problem in dialogue, right? Is that actual realistic conversation is full of a bunch of non sequiturs and irrelevant detours, whereas dialogue is crisp and goes someplace. And
yeah.
And so here they're like bringing up things that are dead ends. And that's really what you would do in this situation, is you'd come up with a bunch of dead ends and then you'd eliminate them. And whatever remained, no matter how implausible, would somehow become the truth. And instead what they're doing here is you're like, why are they bringing up these? Why are they like basically putting up Chekhov's gun and then it falls right off the wall?
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Well said, sir. So Sulu and Scott then release them and tell them, and with the phasers pointed at them, start marching them up the stairs. But as soon as Kirk sees a moment to take the upper hand, he goes to punch them. But it's all stopped a minute later as they are teleported to another room. They didn't even get to throw a punch. So they're in some kind of now throne room or parlor. It's sort of like half throne room, half parlor. It's hard to explain. Tell exactly what it is.
Half European, half like B movie.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And the man instantly tells them, "Stop!" which they do. Kirk says, "Well, whoever you are, you have shown your skill at creating illusion." Which is funny because as we were talking about Squire of Gothos, Kirk almost says this like, "Hey, we've seen this crap before, all right? Yeah. You're not showing us anything new here, buddy.
We've had our share of super beings.
Then we get
come out on top every time."
Right? Then we get this Trek trope here of Colob saying, "Where did your race get this predilection for resistance?"
I love that.
We get that a lot. I feel like we get that. That's a big Trek trope.
It was in the pilot.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly, with the Telosians. We find out that Colob is his name. Kirk asks why they've been brought here, and he says, "You weren't asked to come here, but you kept insisting on coming." Kirk says then, "Why all the mumbo jumbo?" To which then the cat has to explain what mumbo jumbo is to Colob, who then doesn't even respond, really. He's just like, no, I assure you it wasn't that. And just like, what? I don't even know what that means. Then the cat talks to him again and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Apparently I'm being an inattentive host." And so they walk off. And then the three of them...
Go ahead. Because apparently while she's a cat, Sylvia's, like helping Colob, like be a nice guy. And then when she comes back in the room, she's hostile to Colob. She's all about like being mean to the crew. It's like, this wasn't the cat lady. This is like a different being that came in here, because the cat was kind of friendly.
Yeah.
Friendly and helpful. You, not so much.
So the trio then talk a minute about the cat thing. Spock says there are ancient Earth legends about wizards and their familiars. What's a familiar? Demons in animal form sent to protect and help the wizard. To which Kirk basically says something like poppycock.
Yeah.
To which then Spock delivers this great line of, "I don't create the legend, Captain. I just report it."
So,
I love that.
If you think about creatures that show up again and again as scary, as whether agents of the ultimate evil or just scary in their own right, cats are one of them. Although typically the cat we're thinking of as scary is going to be a manhunter, a lion, a tiger. You see that tiger eating his food, you don't want to wrestle with him all of a sudden.
Right,
so
exactly.
One of the major forms of like human predation that you find amongst Australopithecines are saber-toothed tigers. We find all these bite marks that are, saber-tooth. And so that's one. Snakes is another. And birds of prey is the third. So, and of course, birds of prey has a special place in the Trek universe.
Right, you're just trying to connect it all. I see how you are. It all comes back to the Romulans. Then Colob lays out this giant spread of food, right? Which is just like in the Squire of Gothos.
Yeah.
And I kept wanting them to taste it because I wanted to see if they could actually recreate the taste or not, but we didn't find out this time.
Or whether Sylvia would be like, "Oh, it's so delicious! I love sensation."
She's like pouring like wine down like from the bottle. It's just like pouring down her face. It's so good. It's so good. I get what now. See, that would have been a great scene. I would have enjoyed that. Colob then basically says, "Oh, I think I can do anything to make you cooperate," and then puts down a pile of jewels on everybody's plates. Oh, Colob says, "You can have them all if you leave here without any more inquiry." Kirk's like, "Our ship can manufacture all of these. These are valueless to us." Corob's
exactly
now confused.
Right. So on the one hand, we're getting the very first statement in Star Trek that there is no money. Right? Now they don't come out and say there is no money in the future. Instead, they're like, we can just manufacture this. This is easy. And if we think about it, so the first rubies were manufactured during the 1880s.
Okay.
Sometimes they would accidentally get sapphires, but they didn't know why. Over the 1880s and 1890s, they figure out how to make sapphires, and by about 1900, they could make the first ruby large enough to be used in jewelry. A little bit later, in the 1920s, they start making synthetic diamonds. By 1955, GE had manufactured with witnesses and, all the people like, "Oh yeah, you really did it." They made their first synthetic diamonds. And because up until the 20s, it was like people would say, "Look, I made diamonds." And you're like, "Well, how did you do it?" And you'd explain it. And people were like, "Did he really do it?" And it was till 55 when, GE proved you could do it and how to do it. And those diamonds were too small for jewelry, but they could be used industrially as grinding and so forth. And so in 1967, you'd have people going, synthetic gems is already a thing. In the future, they'll be able to manufacture tons of them with their replicators. They'll be valueless. And this is the argument, right? Is that in a future of kind of unlimited energy, matter, antimatter being your power source, you can just make anything. Material wants have disappeared. There's no need for a medium of exchange because whatever it is, you just make it.
Well, yeah, we're even making, as you've said, we're making diamonds now, and now they've got that process that can basically make jewelry-sized diamonds for nothing, Yeah. That really is kind of upset De Beers of all people. They're really kind of upset because they're like, "No, we hold the gems." De Beers, again, talking about James Bond, or from James Bond the other day. Colob says he doesn't understand. He has made an error, but nonetheless, the trio has passed the tests. Tests of loyalty, tests of bravery, and you've also proved you cannot be bribed. The cat then asks to leave, which it does.
They all watch it go.
They all watch it go, and then a stunning woman comes right back in. We find out her name is Sylvia. She tells them that the men's minds have been probed, Sulu and Scott. Kirk then jumps Scotty and takes his phaser. He shoves Scott away like he's useless. That was so funny. If you look at that moment, he just is like, "Get out of here." It's so funny. He then hands the phaser to Spock and says, Cover me, which I also thought was really funny. And then he's like, I want answers, and I want them now. Sylvia now has this little necklace of the Enterprise. She holds it over a candle. She then gives him his communicator so he can call the ship. He calls the ship. The heat is rising on the ship. Chekhov says, we're burning up, sir. Commercial. Dun, dun, dun. Back to it. Kirk surrenders. Fine. He gives up the phasers and then takes the talisman of the Enterprise and puts it down. On board the ship, we see now that everything is okay, but that they can't get a hold of Kirk again. Back down on the planet, Colob says, you've seen some of our science now. Let's hear about some of yours. Kirk says, is it magic or science? It looks like both. Well, what would you call it? Asked Colob. Wouldn't even attempt to, says Kirk. What you do with your mind, we do with tools. It's true, we can manipulate matter, says Colob, but then Sylvia stops him. He's given something away. And then Bones tries to pry some more information out of Colob, but Sylvia shuts him down again. Kirk thinks he's won now. Now that they know I'm alive, how long do you think it'll take for them to send a search party, he says. So then Colob puts the talisman in plastic. Nah, no they won't. There's a force field around the ship. We cut to the bridge, and sure enough, Chekhov sees the force field. Kirk still refuses to cooperate, and so they are taken away. But at the last moment, Sylvia demands that Bones stays. On the bridge now, DeSalle decides that if it's real, then it must be affected somehow. So they keep whittling away at it. And there's our line about the, if it's real, then Navy beans or whatever. Back in the cell, Kirk and Bones talk about what could be causing this. Is this like the twilight of reality? Is this like a dream state? What's happening? Then Kirk says, I don't like hostile strangers taking an acute interest in our galaxy, our worlds. We have to stop them. But they realize they are both stuck. Now Bones enters, and he too is being mind-controlled. And he takes Kirk to Colob and Sylvia.
Kirk is
Meanwhile,
so disappointed.
Right? Yeah, he's so sad for his friend.
Doctor.
Meanwhile, Sylvia is starting to dig being human. She likes sensations, we hear. She likes being human. She sends everyone away so that she can have some private time with Captain Kirk. Tell me about your power, Captain. How does it feel? And then Kirk touches her shoulder and then her cheek. Any power you want, I can give you if you join my mind, she says. But here Kirk decides he's going to seduce her, show her a new sensation that she doesn't know about. And then Kirk kisses her. You find me beautiful? I can be any woman. And then she goes and shows how versatile she can be. It's the same actress wearing different wigs, but whatever, she can be versatile and different. And then he kisses her again. All the while, Colob is in the background watching unhappily. He sees what's happening here. He sees that she is becoming too enthralled with being in this galaxy.
And being a sensualist.
That's right. Kirk kisses her again. Kirk now is holding her and touching her, kissing her cheek, kissing her neck, all the while finding out about something called the transmuter, the source. She says she won't go home now. She's going to stay here with Kirk. Billions of worlds of sensations. I can't wait to see them all. And then suddenly, she sees through Kirk's trick. I can see in your mind. You are only faking with me. Now she is angry. That's the problem with trying to fool Mother Nature, I wrote. Chekhov now has found a dent in the force field and keeps sending particles of energy at it. They are slowly working their way out of it. Then suddenly, Colob frees Kirk and Spock and tells him that the Enterprise is now free, although they would have worked their way out anyway. So now we have another situation, another part of the story that doesn't matter.
Right.
At first we're worried, is the Enterprise going to get out of this force field? What's going to happen? Are they going to be able to work their way out? And suddenly Korob's like, oh, no, don't worry about it. It's all fixed. Everything's fine.
I use my
Don't
magic.
worry about it. Yeah. He tells them to leave now while they still can, because if Sylvia finds out, he's going to be pissed. But Kirk says he's not going to leave without his men. They're not your men, says Colob. They're Sylvia's men. Colob tells us how she's become irrational. We could have entered your galaxy in peace, he said. So here's another moment where we're just like, I don't even know what's happening in this anymore. They mentioned the transmuter again. Oh, okay. So the transmuter's mentioned again. This is apparently important. And as Colob takes them out of the dungeon, we see the giant shadow of a cat. It's not even a giant cat. It's just a giant shadow of a cat. We're going to commercial. Something scary is happening. Back at it. Fascinating, says Spock. It is the most ruthless and terrifying of animals, cats. So it's just like you were saying earlier,
Yep.
There's a reason that cats are scary. Back in the dungeon, they climb out of the hole that they fell through. Meanwhile, the giant cat, oh no, it's outside the door. Then it pushes through the door, and Colob is crushed by it. Kirk tries to help him, but Colob apparently dies or something. I don't know what happens here. Also, this is kind of stupid because, as we have seen many times on the internet, cats can fit anywhere. Like, the cat would have tried to, squeeze through that little door, and he would have made it. That's the other important thing to know. Because cats, man. Cats. Anyway, the cat never comes in. Kirk steals Colob's...
See, what Kirk needed to do is throw a cucumber at it.
Right, exactly. Then it would have hissed and run away. Kirk steals Colob's wand, and then McCoy attacks, and then Sulu, and then Scott attacks Spock. The three of them are quickly knocked out.
And what are they using? They look like styrofoam maces.
Well, we that was also in the original pilot episode where all those wooden swords they were using and everything. You're just like, those don't look real to me at all. I know, it's ridiculous. All three are quickly knocked out, but then the giant cat approaches. Oh, if only your phaser had some power. Oh, this gives Kirk an idea, and he grabs Colob's wand, and then he approaches the giant cat. Sylvia, he says, I have the transmuter. Sylvia then turns back into a woman for some reason. And then Spock warns him, don't let her touch it. They then move their way back into the parlor. The transmuter is not the source of power, but it is an amplifier, we find out. You don't know how to use it, says Sylvia.
Much like a certain mirror.
Right, exactly. You don't know how to use it, says Sylvia. But I catch on quick, says Shatner. Or Kirk. Both.
What of them? Both of them.
At the same time. She begs him one last time, please come with me. I need your ambition, your desires. And then she pulls a phaser on him and says, if you won't come with me, I demand the transmuter. So Kirk, in a stunning, smart use of thinking, breaks the transmuter. An explosion happens. And we find Kirk standing on a rocky cliff, alone. Then Spock shows up. Then Bones. Then Scott. Then Sulu. It's all destroyed, says Scott. Not everything. And there are two little bluish puppets of some kind. Now, you would think that I would ridicule the hell out of this, but no, because actually I love this idea. I think it's great. I think that it's really cool to come up with something we haven't seen before, right? It's not like a beam of energy with Q or the Squire. It's actually some kind of crazy creature that we've never seen before. Right. Yeah. It's really neat. I like that idea. And for somehow in our universe, whatever they look like in their universe, in our universe, this is what they look like, with these little daisies as eyes or whatever they got going on there. Super cool idea. I appreciate it. So they stand there and they watch, and both Colob and Sylvia die without the transmuter. All this an illusion, says Bones. Not entirely, says Kirk. Jackson is still dead. He opens the communicator, and they beam away.
Although, for all we know, we get up there, and Jackson's like getting up, dusting himself off.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. It sounds like the way things went that he's dead.
Although, if it were Sulu, that's what would happen. Sulu would be getting up going, what happened?
Well, that's funny. I thought that same thing because I was like, well, if you're going to use like Sulu, then at least have him come back at the end. That could at least be a thing.
You just have him get up and like it was a part of the magic. He just appeared dead.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about a little bit about the money, because that's what we like to do at the end of each episode. The Westenheimer Company provided the photographic effects for this episode and the magic show. The cost of effects, $14,150. So you got that. You got the $13,000 it cost to build the castle. You're looking at $27,000 just for that. Nobody's getting paid or anything. That's just $20,000 off the budget. The studio mandated per allowance episode now down to $185,000 per episode. The total cost of Catspaw, $217,285. Woo! Oh my goodness, we're already so over. The deficit already going into episode 1. Yeah, it's like $30,000. It's crazy. Things are not looking good for Star Trek and Desilu. That's all I am saying.
And again, you're going to have these people who are thinking, we got to protect Lucy. We got to protect her money. We can't let these people throw it away on something stupid like this.
Some kind of crazy show with little puppet birds at the end of it. That's them making fun of it, not me. I'm just saying. All right. Fiction. Well, that wraps up this episode. Anything else we didn't talk about that you wanted to get to?
No, got it all. Got that big piece of it right there.
Excellent. Love it. Well, that's Catspaw for you, folks. Crazy episode. Something I had never seen before. Don't ever probably want to see again because it's ridiculous. But next week, we're going to be hitting the episode Metamorphosis. I don't know anything about this episode either, so that'll be exciting.
What was wrong with the episode?
Catspaw?
Yeah. So I think you have like these 3 disconnected parts, right? Here's going to be my final analysis.
Okay, hit me.
The first part is spooky. The second part involves we want to steal your technology. And the third part is just people running around chasing each other.
Yes.
So it's not entirely an action episode. It's not built on this, they're trying to steal our tech. And then like, what the heck about the spooky stuff that disappears? It's like 3 different episodes that got crammed together.
Well, that's my, me, because I talk a lot about story, right? And I just don't feel that this is a cohesive story at all. Because these things that they set up in Act 1 don't go anywhere. Like there's not even an explanation for why they were using the scary stuff. You know what I mean? I know that they had set up the idea of the curse and everything else.
I think they breached this idea of and it was very Jungian, right? And then, in fact, Spock makes these references to Jungian archetypes. And I thought that was very cool. As a guy who likes some Jung. And
right.
So I think part of it is that they were reaching into the collective unconscious, so to speak, right? What are the things that frighten all humans? Ghosts, specters, spooky stuff, the cats.
Which Spock even mentions.
Yeah, right. And then, but then, really it should have never completely gone away and should have come back as part 3 when they're running around doing stuff. All they really had was the big cat. They weren't having their minds blown with crazy spectral stuff or nothing.
But why go to the big cat? You know what I mean? I mean, admittedly, I know that they wanted to do bats in one of the original versions, and obviously they couldn't get bats. But I mean, there's like you could have done a ghost. There could have been other things other than a giant cat that would have maybe brought it all together. I just don't feel like the cat in and of itself was enough to do it. You know what I mean? And why scare them? Especially at that point, once you get to Act 3, like why bother to scare them? I feel like at least I feel like the cat was there to like attack them. You know what I mean? It was actually ready to like pounce and yeah, exactly. Whoops. I mean, had they done ghosts, I don't know if that would have worked either. The whole beginning just doesn't work with the end, other than, hey, we want to do something that could be scary for Halloween.
So the final reveal was like, we break your transmuter, you lose all your power. One of the things they could have been figuring out if they kept throwing illusions at them at the end is that maybe they really have no power. Maybe all they can really do is illusion, which is another kind of Star Trek trope.
Right. Yeah, I guess I don't. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my feeling at it.
Yeah,
It
there's no
doesn't feel
connective
like,
tissue. Yeah.
yeah, it just doesn't really like hold together for me. It's pretty ridiculous. Yeah. So like I said, next week, Metamorphosis. I don't even know what comes after that. Give me a second. So yeah, we got Metamorphosis, then Friday's Child, then Who Mourns for Adonis, and then episode 7, we finally get Amok Time. So it's funny because in airing, these two swap. Because episode 7 is actually this one, and episode 1 is actually Amok Time when it comes to air dates. So that's interesting. Anyway, there you go. There's the next 7 episodes for you. It's the order we're going to be doing them in, so get all your watching in now. Anyway, my name's Matt. I'm saying goodbye from Austin, and as always from Planet Houston is my brother Ken. Say goodbye, Ken.
Live long and prosper.
Woohoo! All right, and we will see everybody next week.